Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world one book at a time.
Today, we are undertaking a systems deep dive into Jeremy Rifkin's 2014 landmark work, the Zero Marginal Cost Society.
And this book, it tackles what might be the ultimate systemic contradiction facing our global economic structures. It asks a pretty profound question. Can market capitalism, the system we all live in, actually survive in an economy where the cost of producing things approaches zero?
It's a question that sounds almost philosophical, but Rifkin's entire argument is that this is no longer a thought experiment. It's a material reality unfolding right now.
Right. And before we get too deep, let's establish the key term for anyone who maybe hasn't spent time in an economics class recently. When we say marginal cost, what exactly are we talking about?
Marginal cost is, well, it's incredibly simple in concept, but its implications are just massive. It is the cost to produce one additional unit of something after you've already paid all the huge fixed costs to get set up in the first place.
Okay, so give me an example. Like a pharmaceutical company spends $1 billion on research and development for a new drug.
That's your fixed cost. A huge one.
But then, once the factory is built and running, the cost of the chemicals and the electricity to make just one more pill.
That tiny amount, that's the marginal cost.
And in classical capitalism, that's where all the action is.
Exactly. The entire structure of profit, pricing, competition, it all relies on charging a price that's just a little bit above that marginal cost. That markup is where the market lives and breathes. The whole game is about lowering your marginal cost faster than your competitor.
Okay, so here's the crisis. What happens if the marginal cost for nearly everything, I'm talking energy, manufactured goods, information, logistics, what if it all starts plummeting towards zero?
The mechanism breaks. The whole system for generating profit just grinds to a halt. And Rifkin's point is that this isn't a scenario for 100 years from now. He argues it's an immediate structural challenge.
And what's making it so immediate? Why now?
It's the convergence. It's not one single technology, but the synergy of three vast technological ecosystems that have all matured at the same time.
Okay, what are they?
You've got automation being supercharged by artificial intelligence. You have the rapid, and I mean exponentially rapid, adoption of decentralized renewable energy.
Solar, wind.
Right. And then you have the force that integrates them all. Digital networks, which Rifkin calls the Internet of Things, or the IoT. Any one of these is a game changer. But all three together, they structurally compress costs across the entire value chain.
That synergy point feels crucial because what we're really talking about is a fundamental reshaping of, the core pillars of economic life.
We are. The very definition of labor, the meaning of ownership, the nature of economic value itself. It's a shift from an economy that was, for all of human history, organized around scarcity to one that is now, for the first time, being organized around potential abundance.
Which is why we need to be really clear about our focus for this deep dive.
Absolutely. We are focused on the structural transitions. We're looking at how new energy communication matrices literally force a change in how we organize our economy. We want to study the institutional consequences, the system dynamics.
And what we're not doing is getting into the tech hype or utopian promises or political advocacy.
No, we're here to understand the mechanisms of change that Rifkin lays out, the unstoppable logic of the system itself.
Okay, so let's turn to the architect of this analysis, Jeremy Rifkin. He's been looking at these huge shifts for decades. What's his background, and how does this book fit into his bigger picture?
Rifkin is a major social and economic theorist. He's really known for his work on how great technological platforms change society. Specifically, he focuses on the intersection of communication and energy.
He argues that's the matrix that defines every major industrial era.
Precisely. For Rifkin, industrial revolutions aren't just, a bunch of cool inventions. They are deep infrastructural shifts.
So the first industrial revolution was steam power married to the printing press,
which gave us mass literacy and the centralized factory. Then the second industrial revolution married oil and the internal combustion engine to the centralized electric grid and telecommunications.
And that gave us the world many of us grew up in. Mass production, vertically integrated corporations, the consumer economy.
A world defined by scarcity and mass employment. Yes.
So the Zero Marginal Cost Society, which came out in 2014, argues we are now deep into the third industrial revolution. What's the infrastructure for this one?
Rifkin defines it as the full integration of three distinct internets. There's the communications internet we all know, but it's converging with a new energy internet and a logistics internet.
And the Internet of Things, the IoT, is what links them all together.
It's the platform. And this platform is fundamentally different. It's distributed, it's laterally scaled, and it's optimized for maximum efficiency in a way the old system could never be.
So if the very bones of the system are changing from centralized and vertical, like an oil pipeline, to distributed and lateral, like the Internet itself, then the way the economy is organized has to change too.
It's an institutional necessity.
Okay, let's dig into that. To really understand why this is so destabilizing, we have to go back to the role of marginal cost in classical capitalism.
To see the future, you have to understand the past. And classical economics, from Adam Smith to Jean-Baptiste say, it basically modeled the economy on Newtonian physics. It was seen as this kind of perpetual motion machine.
The idea being that competition drives innovation.
Which boosts productivity, which lowers costs, which then spurs new demand, and the cycle of growth just continues forever.
Guided by the famous invisible hand that turns private self-interest into the best outcome for everyone, the optimum general welfare.
Exactly. But here is the profound internal contradiction that Rifkin unearths. If the entire goal of this market machine is optimum general welfare, and you get there by relentlessly driving for more efficiency and more productivity,
then the logical endpoint of that process is pushing the marginal cost of making the next thing so low that it approaches zero.
making the product essentially free.
And if the product is free, the system that runs on profit just vanishes.
The engine stops. It's a staggering thought. The system succeeds itself into obsolescence. It perfectly achieves its stated goal of efficiency, and in doing so, it ends its own reign.
Adam Smith just couldn't have foreseen a technological plateau where the efficiency gain becomes so extreme that the cost structure itself collapses.
He couldn't. And Rifkin argues this is exactly what's happening. The traditional market, which is defined by scarcity and profit margins, is being weakened. It's not disappearing entirely, but it's contracting into very narrow, specialized niches.
So what fills that vacuum? This has to be the central thesis of the book.
It is. The central thesis is that the vacuum left by this shrinking market is being filled by a new and rising economic sphere, the collaborative commons.
And what does that look like?
It's an economy that centers on sharing, on peer-to-peer production, on access over ownership. And Rifkin predicts it will fundamentally displace market exchange as the dominant way we organize economic life by the middle of this century.
That is a radical prediction. Not that the market will be overthrown in a revolution, but that it will just be superseded by a more efficient system that grew out of its own success.
That's the core of the analysis. Let's start mapping it out, piece by piece. How do these individual technologies drive this? And what are the institutional consequences for the old guard?
Right. Let's start with the idea that capitalism's own engine, the entrepreneurial drive for efficiency, is what causes this. Rifkin calls the digital realm the first big precedent for this.
The opening act.
Yeah.
We've all been watching this play out for years, whether we realize it or not. I mean, look at the music or publishing industries.
Absolutely. Think about it. The fixed costs in music are huge. The studio time, the artists, the marketing budget.
But once that initial MP3 file is created, what's the marginal cost of distributing 1 million copies? Or 1 billion?
It's basically zero. You just need bandwidth.
And that reality immediately bypassed the traditional middlemen. The record labels, the distributors, the retailers, their entire business model was based on controlling a scarce physical product.
And the consequence wasn't just that the industry got smaller. It was the birth of what Rifkin calls the prosumer.
Exactly. The producer, who is also the consumer. Rifkin points out that today, more than a third of humanity is actively producing and sharing its own information.
Videos, blogs, open source software, music tracks on SoundCloud.
All of it. On cheap devices, shared on global platforms, at near zero marginal cost for distribution. We have billions of people engaged in peer-to-peer production, and here's the key. They're often doing it outside of any traditional market price. They're sharing for social capital, for reputation, not for profit.
That's a massive shift of value and power away from the old centralized corporate structures. But I want to pause here because it's important to note this contradiction was spotted long before the internet. This isn't just a digital thing.
That's such a vital point. It's a systemic risk in any advanced industrial economy. Rifkin looks back to the 1930s, another period of huge technological change and economic crisis, where some very sharp minds saw this coming.
You're talking about economists like Oscar Lange and John Maynard Keynes. Let's start with Lange, because his worries sound so incredibly relevant to today's big tech monopolies.
They do. Lange was writing in the 30s,
Mm.
and he was worried that as industries matured, you'd naturally get these giant oligopolies or monopolies because the initial capital costs were so high.
Right.
But he predicted these entrenched giants would then actively try to block further technological progress. Why? Because that progress threatened the value of the capital they had already invested in the old, outmoded technology.
So their own factories, their own infrastructure would become worthless. It becomes a struggle not of innovator against competitor, but of capitalist against capitalists.
Yes, those who want the next efficiency gain versus those who are desperately trying to protect the value of their existing assets. Lange saw this creating huge instability, these long stalls in progress, as corporations fought to hold back the tide.
You can see that exact dynamic today in the political fights over renewable energy, where fossil fuel companies are trying to protect their pipelines and power plants from becoming stranded assets.
It's the same structural conflict. It's the system's internal failure to adapt to its own potential for productivity.
And then you have Keynes writing around the same time, but he was much more optimistic about what this would all mean in the end.
Far more optimistic. In his famous 1930 essay, Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren, Keynes foresaw this exact problem. He even coined the term technological unemployment, where machines would simply outrun our ability to find new jobs for people.
But he didn't see that as a catastrophe.
Not at all. For Keynes, this was the ultimate triumph. It was humanity finally solving what he called the economic problem, the age-old struggle for subsistence, for material scarcity.
The end goal was liberation.
Yes. He looked forward to a future where automated machines would produce such abundance that humanity would be freed from toil. We could finally focus on the arts of life, on culture, creativity, community, transcendence. For Rifkin, the Zero Marginal Cost Society is the structural realization of Keynes' philosophical dream.
Okay, so if the digital world was the opening act, the Internet of Things, the IoT, is the main stage. This is what takes the zero marginal cost phenomenon out of the world of bits and bytes and into the physical world of manufacturing, energy, and logistics. Let's really define what this platform is.
The IoT is the backbone of this third industrial revolution. It's the seamless integration of what used to be three totally separate infrastructures: communication, energy, and logistics.
And when you say Internet of Things, you don't just mean a smart thermostat.
Not at all. I mean, think bigger. Think of a global neural network. It connects people, yes, but also machines, raw materials in the ground, production lines, supply chains, and even our own consumption habits. It's all linked by billions and billions of sensors and software, feeding back data in real time.
It sounds like a fully closed-loop system. But how specifically does that integration drive marginal costs to zero?
It's all about eliminating waste. It's about optimizing thermodynamic efficiency at every single step. The IoT is constantly feeding this torrential amount of big data from every node in the system.
Data on performance, on consumption, on wear and tear.
Everything. That data gets processed by advanced analytics into predictive algorithms. And those algorithms are then programmed into automated systems.
So instead of reacting when something breaks or when demand changes, the system is always anticipating. It's self-correcting.
In real time. These automated systems are constantly tweaking processes to use less energy, fewer materials to get the same or even greater output. That's what drives up productivity and just ruthlessly cuts down marginal costs across the entire value chain. Every wasted second, every wasted joule of energy gets identified and engineered out of the system.
Let's ground this with some real-world examples from the book. How does this work in a field like logistics?
Look at a company like UPS. They put sensors in tens of thousands of their vehicles. These sensors aren't just tracking the location. They're monitoring the health of individual parts inside the engine, in the transmission, the axles.
So the system can predict a failure before it happens.
With incredible accuracy. It can see that a specific bearing in a specific truck is showing signs of wear and is likely to fail in, say, the next 200 miles. So it automatically schedules a replacement during the truck's next planned maintenance stop.
Which means you completely avoid a costly, unplanned breakdown on the side of a highway.
You eliminate billions in waste.
Yeah.
You shift the whole operation from reactive maintenance to predictive optimization.
And what about in smart cities or agriculture?
In smart cities, sensors monitor traffic flow to adjust stoplights. They monitor pollution, even the structural health of a bridge. Public lighting dims automatically when there's no movement, saving energy every second.
And in farming?
Sensors in the soil monitor moisture levels. Drones monitor crop health. And even in transit, sensors inside a refrigerated truck can literally sniff the air for the chemical signs of spoilage. If it detects a problem, it can automatically reroute the shipment to a closer buyer to avoid losing the whole cargo.
When you think about that level of optimization scaled across the entire global economy, the numbers involved are just staggering.
They are. Cisco once projected that the Internet of Everything would generate something like $14.4 trillion in cost savings and revenue. And GE had a great one. They estimated that just a 1% improvement in fuel efficiency across the entire aviation industry
Just 1%?
would save $30 billion over 15 years. Now, apply that 1% optimization to every industry on Earth. That's how marginal cost collapses.
Okay, this is where I think Rifkin brings in the most disruptive piece of the puzzle. Historically, industrial revolutions were fueled by new, cheap energy sources. The third industrial revolution is fueled by renewable energy, but here the fuel itself, the sun, the wind, is free. How does that change the cost structure?
This is the pivot point. Unlike coal or oil, renewable energy harvesting follows an exponential cost curve, just like computer chips. All the cost is front-loaded. It's in the massive fixed capital investment to build the solar panels, the wind turbines, the battery storage.
But once that's paid for,
Once that fixed cost is amortized, which can be as fast as 2 to 8 years now for solar and wind, the marginal cost of the energy you harvest from the sun or the wind is nearly free.
the sun doesn't send you a bill.
The wind doesn't charge by the hour. These are constant, zero marginal cost inputs. And that is the fundamental structural difference that makes the fossil fuel industry so incredibly vulnerable.
It's a totally different architecture. Fossil fuels require this massive, centralized, vertically integrated system. You have to find it, drill for it, transport it, refine it, and then distribute it through a centralized grid. Control is concentrated.
But renewables are the opposite. They're inherently distributed. The sun is on every roof, the wind is on every coastline, and the energy internet powered by the IoT is the nervous system that organizes all of this distributed power.
It allows people to produce and share energy peer-to-peer.
Yes, across microgrids and regional networks. It collaboratively and laterally organizes all this energy, which structurally disintermediates the big centralized utility companies.
And this isn't just a future theory. We're seeing the disruption in market prices right now.
Absolutely. It's leading to one of the most visible consequences: negative electricity prices. In places with a lot of renewables, like Germany or Texas, you get these moments where a huge surge of wind or sun floods the grid and overwhelms demand,
And producers literally have to pay the grid to take their power off their hands.
which is a complete disaster for the business model of traditional utilities. They can no longer guarantee a reliable return on investment for a new multi-billion-dollar gas or coal plant because they know it's going to be constantly undercut by this flood of nearly free power.
So the exponential growth of renewables is actively pushing the more expensive traditional plants off the grid.
It's creating massive stranded assets and leading to the institutional collapse of the old vertically integrated energy model.
Okay, so we've got near-free information and near-free energy. Let's move to the third pillar, physical production. Rifkin talks about 3D printing and peer-to-peer production, which he calls infofacture. How does this apply the zero marginal cost principle to making physical things?
3D printing is about democratizing the means of production. You start with a design file open source software, and the printer builds the object layer by layer with very little human involvement.
And the cost advantages just stack up.
They do. First, you use way less material, sometimes only a tenth of what you'd use in traditional manufacturing, because you're only adding what you need. There's almost no waste. Second, the labor cost is close to zero. The software runs the show.
And the energy to run the printer.
That comes from your local green energy co-op at near zero marginal cost.
So you've dealt with materials, labor, and energy. What about the huge costs of logistics and distribution in a typical supply chain?
They plummet. Because production becomes local again. You're not shipping a part across an ocean from a giant factory. You're printing it in your neighborhood workshop. And open platforms like Etsy and others give you global market reach for pennies, cutting out all the traditional middlemen.
And any shipping you do need is done by electric vehicles running on that same near-free energy.
The entire value chain design, energy, production, distribution gets compressed into a local, highly efficient network.
This is a direct assault on the whole second industrial revolution model of the giant centralized factory.
The institutional consequence is profound. 3D printing allows the consumer to become the prosumer. And crucially, it allows small businesses and individuals to achieve what Rifkin calls lateral economies of scale.
Meaning they can team up in networks to share designs and production capacity.
Exactly. And that distributed network becomes far more efficient and resilient than one massive centralized factory. Efficiency now favors sharing and local collaboration, not corporate centralization.
This brings us to the most sensitive and maybe the most significant consequence of all: the elimination of human labor. If the IoT is driving down the marginal cost of all the physical inputs, it stands to reason it does the same to labor.
It does. The same sophisticated AI and big data that can optimize a power plant can also optimize a workforce, which usually means replacing it. This is happening across all sectors: manufacturing, logistics, and now even high-skilled knowledge work.
Rifkin calls this the great unbundling of productivity and employment.
It's a critical concept. We're becoming radically more productive as a species, but that productivity no longer requires mass human labor to achieve it.
The data on this is pretty stark.
It's devastating for the traditional labor market. Take U.S. manufacturing. Between 2000 and 2008, the country lost about 3.9 million manufacturing jobs. But during that same time, manufacturing output increased by 60%.
How is that possible?
A 30% jump in productivity, driven entirely by robots and software. The marginal cost of labor in manufacturing is functionally zero, not because workers are cheaper, but because they've been completely substituted by capital.
And we're seeing this move well beyond the factory floor into areas like logistics.
Or absolutely. Driverless vehicles are projected to eliminate a huge chunk of the 2.7 million trucking jobs in the U.S. by 2040. And you've seen the videos of automated warehouses like Amazon's, where robots do almost all the picking and sorting.
But the argument was always that new high-skilled jobs would replace the old ones. What about knowledge work?
The substitution is moving up the skill ladder, fast. AI-powered e-discovery software can now sift through millions of legal documents for a fraction of the time and cost it would take a team of young lawyers. Real-time translation programs are making highly paid human translators redundant.
So if technology is replacing labor across the board, the market economy has a huge problem on its hands. It doesn't matter how much abundance you create if nobody has a paycheck to buy it.
That's the core contradiction. The fundamental capitalist relationship, exchanging labor for a wage to create purchasing power, gets broken when AI becomes the primary worker. If only a tiny fraction of people are employed in the market, your consumer base collapses.
So what Rifkin is saying is that human labor is being structurally freed from the market.
Freed from market necessity, yes. And that freed labor has to migrate somewhere.
And where does it go?
It migrates to the evolving social economy, the collaborative commons. This is a realm where value isn't measured in dollars and cents, but in social capital.
So things like trust, reputation, community engagement, collaboration.
Exactly. It's a profound shift in what we value and how human identity is defined. We move away from our job being our primary identity.
Okay, we've laid out the tech and the consequences. Let's now explicitly do a systems map of this whole transition. Who are the key players, and what are their incentives in this battle between the market and the commons?
It's a contested space. First, you have the corporations, and they're really split into two camps. You have the old guard, the giants of the second industrial revolution, fossil fuel companies, old school manufacturers. Their primary incentive is to block this transition, to create regulations to protect their massive investments in the old system.
And then you have the big tech and platform companies, the Googles, the Ciscos, the GEs.
Their incentive is different and maybe more subtle. They aren't trying to stop the zero marginal cost phenomenon. They're trying to enclose it. They want to be the indispensable gatekeepers. They want to aggregate all the network services and monetize the massive flows of big data.
So they survive by selling access to the network, not the stuff on the network.
Precisely. The counterforce to them is the collection of prosumers and communities.
The people actually generating the energy, sharing the information, printing the goods.
They're the ones actually financing this new infrastructure, whether they know it or not, through things like feed-in tariffs on their utility bills. And they interact on platforms, which are the battlegrounds. You have commercial platforms like Facebook against nonprofit, open source platforms like Wikipedia.
And then the grassroots organizations.
The communities and cooperatives. Think of the green energy co-ops in Germany, where more than half of all the renewable energy capacity is owned by individuals and local communities. They use the distributed architecture to create lateral economies of scale that completely bypass corporate control.
And the incentives for these groups are completely opposed.
Diametrically. On the market side, the incentive is always to keep the price above marginal cost. That means you need to get temporary monopoly power. It also means you have to fiercely protect your intellectual property to keep valuable information and code enclosed.
Whereas the commons incentives are all about reducing cost, maximizing efficiency, ensuring universal access, and building that social capital we talked about.
It's a deep clash of narratives. The old market story is a story of scarcity. It's John Locke's right to property, Adam Smith's self-interest. The emerging commons narrative, enabled by technology, is a story of sustainable abundance, of transparency and collaboration.
It's a world where creativity is seen as additive and shared, like with Creative Commons licenses, rather than something autonomous that needs to be enclosed by copyright.
And this whole dynamic gets amplified by these incredibly powerful feedback loops. This is why the market can't just find a new equilibrium.
Walk us through that main loop slowly.
It starts with efficiency. Lower marginal costs in communication. The internet enables mass peer-to-peer sharing. Think Napster, but now think Wikipedia. This culture of sharing, combined with open source models, then dramatically lowers the cost of entry for making new things.
Because the software design is free, the blueprint is free.
So these low entry costs and near-free goods encourage more and more prosumers to just bypass the traditional market altogether.
Which then shrinks the demand and the profit margins for the big centralized companies.
And the loop becomes self-reinforcing. The pursuit of efficiency drives costs down, which enables more sharing, which further undermines the scarcity-based market system. The market is being structurally defeated by its own success.
This tension forces us to revisit a really old debate about governance. How should we finance and manage huge infrastructures that are basically public goods? This brings us back to that 1930s debate between hoteling and coase.
This is so critical for understanding today's fights over things like net neutrality. Harold Hotelling's argument was simple. For public goods, the best outcome for society optimal welfare happens when the price you charge people is equal to the marginal cost.
Which, if the marginal cost is basically zero, means the price should be zero.
Right. And to pay for the huge fixed costs of building the thing, like a bridge or a power grid, Hotelling said the government should finance it through general taxes.
But that's not the path we took. Ronald Coase made the counter-argument.
Coase argued that government financing was inefficient and would misallocate resources. He preferred private companies to build and run infrastructure, and they would pay for it with things like multi-part pricing, like your monthly internet bill, a fixed fee, plus maybe a usage charge, to keep the price above marginal cost and recoup their investment.
And Coase's view pretty much won the 20th century.
It did. But Rifkin points out that the reality of how the IoT is actually being financed completely undermines Coase's argument.
How so?
Because this vast new infrastructure, the internet backbone, the renewable energy grid, it's largely being financed by us, by consumers and taxpayers. Those green energy feed-in tariffs in Germany are paid for by tiny increases on everyone's utility bills. Millions of small players are underwriting this revolution collectively.
So the infrastructure is already being subsidized by the public. The real question is, who gets to control the open platform that we all paid for?
That is the core governance struggle today. Can corporations use regulations, proprietary software, and especially intellectual property law to enclose this open, distributed platform that was collectively financed? This is what Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the web, called the corporatization of the social commons.
The danger is a platform like Facebook taking all the data we generate for free as part of the commons and walling it off to sell to advertisers for their private profit.
That is the great enclosure of the 21st century. It's the market's last-ditch attempt to survive by creating artificial scarcity around data and access, instead of letting the natural abundance of the commons flourish.
Okay, let's bring this into the present day. What are some of the clear present-day implications of these structural patterns? We can see it everywhere in the shift from ownership to access.
This is the market's most visible adaptation. As marginal costs fall, selling physical things becomes a losing game, so the market transforms itself. It becomes an aggregator of network services. It starts selling access and time instead of property.
Spotify is the classic example. You don't own the CD. You pay for access to the entire library of music.
Or car sharing services, instead of owning a car, you pay only for the time you actually use the asset. Structurally, this is fascinating because it actually reduces GDP. Fewer cars are sold, but it increases the overall utility and welfare for the user. The asset gets used much more efficiently.
So the pattern is that the capitalist market shrinks to the edges. It becomes a management layer. It provides the insurance for the shared car or the financing or the software platform that manages access to the commons.
It contracts into these very specialized niches that are necessary for the commons to function, but it's no longer the center of economic life.
Let's come back to labor displacement. We talked about the long-term trend, but Rifkin points out a really important paradox in the short term.
Yes, while the long-term future is one of continuous substitution of capital for labor, the immediate short to medium term presents this huge, once-in-a-civilization opportunity for mass employment.
And that's to build out the very infrastructure that will eventually automate everything.
Exactly. The physical build-out of the IoT is a monumental undertaking. Rifkin estimates it's a 40-year window, about 2 generations of highly labor-intensive work.
What kind of jobs?
Construction, retrofitting, installation. Think about what it takes to convert hundreds of millions of existing buildings into smart, green micropower plants, installing millions of smart meters, batteries, and charging stations, rebooting the entire global transportation system from combustion to electric.
We're basically talking about retooling the entire built environment of the planet.
It is, and it will create millions of skilled, necessary jobs. But, and this is the crucial part, it's a temporary transitional phase. It's the last great wave of mass wage labor before the fully automated systems come online and take over management. We have to use this window to manage the social transition wisely.
And regarding the energy transition, you mentioned Rifkin sees the shift to renewables as simply inevitable based on cost, even setting aside the climate argument.
The math is just relentless. The marginal cost of extracting fossil fuels from harder-to-reach places, deep sea oil, tar sands, is constantly rising. You have to put more and more energy in to get less energy out.
While the cost of renewable energy generation is on an exponential down curve.
Exactly. After the fixed costs are paid, the input is free. The old energy model is just thermodynamically inferior, and it's institutionally clumsy. The old centralized grid is too rigid and inefficient to manage millions of intermittent power sources. The distributed energy internet is the only technologically agile way to do it.
This all seems to point toward a radical change in how we measure success, a shift in our sustainability and value metrics.
If the economy is moving from scarcity to abundance, then GDP, which mostly just measures market transactions, becomes a less and less useful metric of well-being. The market is shrinking, so GDP will shrink, even as our quality of life might be improving.
So what replaces it?
Quality of life indices, the health of the shared commons, the aggregation of social capital. Rifkin argues that by mid-century, our main concern will shift from measuring how much we exchange to measuring how well we collaborate to maintain planetary health and social well-being.
That structural perspective brings us right to our channel's core focus, the connections to crisis and perception. How does this deep dive help us see the system differently and avoid blaming individuals for systemic failures?
It forces us to see that the decline of this phase of capitalism isn't happening because of, socialists or greedy CEOs or bad trade deals. It's being driven by the system's own internal, unstoppable logic. It's the entrepreneurial spirit relentlessly pursuing efficiency that is causing the transformation.
The system is essentially consuming itself by perfectly executing on the principles laid out by Adam Smith.
It's a systemic outcome, not a moral failure. And this requires a fundamental reset of our common sense, which for 300 years has been shaped by market logic.
The whole Enlightenment narrative that framed self-interest and competition in a world of scarcity as the best path forward.
That was the operating system for the Second Industrial Revolution. But the new IoT infrastructure requires a different social operating system. To manage complex, laterally scaled networks, you need collaboration, trust, and empathy. Competition is just inefficient in this new environment. So our very definition of human nature might shift to align with the new technological reality.
But let me push back on that for a second. The argument for inevitability is strong, but capitalism has always been incredibly adaptive. It's always found a new form of scarcity to monetize. Why is Rifkin so sure it can't just successfully enclose and monetize the commons forever rather than be replaced by it?
That is the critical question, and Rifkin is clear. The battle is over governance, not technology. The physics and the thermodynamics, the drive toward near-zero marginal cost, that part is inevitable.
But the rules of the game are not.
The governance model is still up for grabs. Will it be a capitalism 3.0 hybrid, where corporate aggregators manage the system and extract value from our data? Or will it be a true collaborative commons managed by democratic cooperatives? That is being chosen right now.
So we're not just passive passengers here.
Not at all. The intense political fights over net neutrality, over patent law for open source systems, over the right for local communities to form their own green energy grids, these all show that this transition is a contested process of institutional choice. The question isn't if the economy changes, but who gets to write the rules for the new platform.
This has been an incredibly detailed look at how capitalism's greatest success, its relentless drive for efficiency, is what leads it to a world of abundance, which in turn challenges the very logic of the system itself. Let's try to conclude with a reflection on the core shifts Rifkin helps us see.
I think at its heart, the book shows us that capitalism's great triumph was organizing an economy of scarcity. It did that incredibly well. But its own success drives it inexorably toward abundance. And in a world of abundance, its main organizing principle, profit from exchange value, becomes irrelevant.
And this forces a reevaluation of human identity, away from our work being our primary source of value.
Exactly. In a highly automated world, human value migrates away from productive output in the market and toward deep play, creativity, community, and the generation of social capital in the commons. It's the fulfillment of that Keynesian dream. Our identity becomes about our contribution to the network, not our position in the market.
And finally, that efficiency argument always comes back to a specific type of organization.
The infrastructure of the third industrial revolution, the IoT, is distributed, lateral, and peer-to-peer. That structure is most efficiently managed by commons-based cooperation. The old, centralized, top-down corporate model is just thermodynamically clunky and inefficient by comparison. It can't compete with alternatives that operated near zero marginal cost.
We have to end then with a question for you, the listener, to reflect on as you watch this transition unfold.
If the market's only path to survival is to find new ways to enclose the commons by commodifying your data, by charging fees for access to near-free resources, by protecting outdated business models with political power, what political and social responsibilities do we, as prosumers, have to defend the open architecture of that commons to ensure that this emerging age of abundance benefits everyone, rather than becoming just a new, more sophisticated form of corporate control?
This has been a deep dive into the Zero Marginal Cost Society by Jeremy Rifkin.
We encourage you to read the book or borrow it from your local library.
This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind crisis and perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon.
For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini-explainer linked in the description.
If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.